script. And we haven't talked about what exactly will happen when we submit the form, but you can bet something's going to happen. So let's just start there. Let's just make something happen when we submit the form. So in our JavaScript file, I said I'm going to put all of this inside one object. So I am going to make a variable called app, and it's an object. And anything that I want to happen when the page loads, I'm just going to make a function in here. I'm going to call it init. And that's going to be the stuff that happens when the page loads. So there's one more thing I need to do outside of this object. At the very end of the file, I'm just going to call app.init so I can be sure this stuff actually runs. If I didn't do that, it'd be lovely. I create this lovely function that never runs. So we'll run it. And then all I want to do is add an event listener that just does something. We'll just make it console log for right this second. So what happens when the page loads? We just start listening for the event to happen, right? We just need to tell it when the event occurs, do something else. We just start listening for it. So inside init, we start listening. So we need to get the form first, right? Document dot query selector. And I gave it an ID. It happens to be the only form on the page for now, but I'm not sure that'll always be the case. So I'll use the ID, flick form. And because I'm going to make this listen for a submit, I want to be darn sure it is a form. So I'm going to go ahead and say a form with the ID of flick form. That way, if I try to do something with it that non-forms can't do, I'll get an exception because I want an exception in that case. I mean, I don't want it to even find the form. I mean, actually, the exception would be fine too, but we just won't find it. So then we'll add an event listener to that. So we could save the form to a variable and stuff, or we could just chain it on the end because query selector will return the form. So we could just chain add event listener on there. So I'm going to do that, but because this line is going to get really long, this is an interesting quirk. You can do that, and if it'll figure out, this is part of the previous statement. If you start a line with a dot, it knows, yeah, that goes with the thing above. So we'll do that and then chain underneath it, dot add event listener. Also makes it easier to tell what all you're chaining on when you're doing chains like this. So we'll just indent it underneath. Add event listener. What event are we listening to for when what happens? Submit, right? Not clicking the button, but submitting the form, because there's more than one way to submit a form. And then we want to call some function that we don't have yet. Oops. So let's write that function. And we'll make it another property of this app object. So put a comma here. And we could call it handle submit if we want, whatever you want to call it. That'll work. Handle submit. Now here's an interesting bit of syntactic sugar in ES6. We just started doing these, so if you want to write it out for now, that's fine. But if a property of an object is a function, you can shorten this to that. Works the same way. You still need the commas in between. It's just a shorter syntax, and it's still very clear in meaning. So you can totally do that. So we could just say init parentheses. Either way. So we know this is going to get past the event, right? So we'll just put EV here. It's a submit. We know it'll refresh the page if we don't stop it, right? So we have to prevent the default action of that event. What else do we want it to do? Let's just get the flick name out of the form and console log it, just to do something. Okay, so const flick name equals. How do we get the form? We don't need to use query selector again, right? Did you say something, Lisa Marie? Okay. How do we get the form? Without knowing the name or anything? Yeah, so this event just occurred on something, right? It's that form we want. We could have the same submit handler for multiple forms. So to make sure it's that form, we can use the event target. And then we happen to know that since we gave our input a name, we can use that name to get to that input. But that'll give us the actual HTML element, the actual input. If we want what was typed in there, we have to do .value, right? So let's grab it like that. Let's console.log the flick name. I'm going to go ahead and put the trailing comma after this method so that I don't forget. Because it's especially easy to forget when it's a method because you don't usually see commas at the end of curly braces, right? But it's just another property of an object. So the big question is, what do we put here? So this is when what happens, do what. So we want to run this function, but how do we refer to this function here? So it's not just handle submit, right? It's app.handleSubmit. But I don't like that. I don't like, we're in app. I don't want to use, I just happen to assign it to a variable name. But down here, I could say, const foo equals app. And if I call foo.init, I want it to still work. And then maybe I could assign app to something else. I want that to still work. There's got to be a way from inside an object to refer to the object, right? This, JavaScript's best feature. You are going to learn to hate this with a passion. But for right now, that's going to do just what we want. So to refer to that function, it's this .handleSubmit, right? Do not put open close parens here, because what would that be? The return value of handleSubmit, which is a whole lot of nothing. We are telling it to listen for this event, and we're telling it what to do. We're not doing it. If we put the parentheses, we're doing it. We're just telling it about the function. We're just passing the function itself as an argument, not the return value. So listen for this to happen, then run this thing. Cool? This .handleSubmit. So inside a method of an object, this usually refers to the object itself. Does it work? Before we start making this do anything more complicated, let's make sure it's wired up correctly. Refresh the page. Name a flick. The rock. Yay, the rock. We did it. I'd like to make this just a tad more flexible. So I gave the form an ID of flick form, right? And now I've hard-coded in that selector in init. What I'd like to do is pass in the selector to use as an argument. Like so. So when I call init, I want to say app init form hash flick form. So we've told it how to find the form, and I just wanted to add an argument to init. I will call it form selector, and then I'll call query selector on that argument form selector. Just to make it a little more flexible. I don't want this function to have to know the structure of my HTML. It'll just grab the form that you supply. Did I break it by doing that? It is worth checking it out. Rock. Nope, still works. Victory is ours. So, what do we do? Set up submit handler for flick form. Push it real good. Celebrate. Yay.